Case 1, The Invisible Prisoner, Jalayah Eason. Jalayah Eason was 6 years old. At an age when a child's world should be expansive, filled with school routines, friendships, and the comfort of a safe place to rest, Jalayah's world had become painfully small. She was a daughter, a sister, and a child deserving of care and protection. Yet long before authorities arrived, she had already become what can only be described as an invisible prisoner within her own home. In the early hours of May 26, 2023, emergency services were called to a 12th floor apartment in the Forest Houses complex in the Bronx. At approximately 4 a.m., Jalayah's mother, Lynija Eason Kumar, reported finding her daughter unresponsive. When responders entered the apartment, they encountered an environment that raised immediate concern. The living conditions showed clear signs of prolonged disregard for a child's basic needs. Jalayah was found in a state that suggested long-term deprivation rather than a sudden medical emergency. She appeared significantly underdeveloped for her age, and responders observed indications that her movement may have been limited over extended periods. Jalayah was taken to Lincoln Hospital, where medical teams made every effort to assist her. Sadly, she passed away shortly afterward. Authorities quickly recognized that the situation extended beyond one child. Jalayah's 2 siblings, an 8-year-old brother and a 3-year-old sister, were removed from the home for their protection. Both children displayed signs consistent with prolonged hardship, including untreated skin conditions and physical indicators of neglect. Over the following months, investigators worked to piece together what had occurred. In April 2024, the Bronx District Attorney's Office announced formal charges against the mother, including second-degree murder. The medical examiner determined that Jalayah's death resulted from sustained physical restriction and unsafe positioning that interfered with normal breathing. Investigators also uncovered troubling details about the apartment itself. A closet within the home had been used not for storage, but as a space where Jalayah was repeatedly confined. This area limited her ability to move freely and remain in a safe physical position. The case exposed serious gaps in the systems designed to protect vulnerable children. Records showed that the family had prior contact with social services. Educators had raised concerns earlier, particularly regarding hygiene and unexplained marks on Jalayah's older sibling. However, those warning signs were not acted upon with sufficient urgency. Jalayah Eason's story leaves behind a critical lesson about what it means to be an invisible prisoner. In many struggling households, harm is often misunderstood as poor parenting or temporary instability. But when a child shows signs of repeated physical restriction or isolation, it signals something far more serious. These are not indicators of discipline. They are indicators of confinement. Children who withdraw into silence are often enduring more than they can express. Their quiet should never be mistaken for calm. In many cases, it is the clearest signal that something is deeply wrong and that intervention is urgently needed. Case 2, the boy behind the blog, Garnett Spears. Garnett Spears was a bright 5-year-old boy with a wide gap-toothed smile and an infectious enthusiasm for Star Wars. He was curious, expressive, and full of personality. He should have been preparing for kindergarten, building friendships, and discovering the world around him. Instead, Garnett's childhood was shaped by a story written for him, one that portrayed him not as a healthy child, but as a fragile symbol of tragedy. To thousands of people online, Garnett was known through carefully curated updates. His life was presented as a constant struggle with unexplained medical challenges. Followers were told he was medically fragile and fighting against persistent illness. What they did not know was that Garnett was not battling a rare condition. He was living inside a constructed narrative Online, his mother, Lacey Spears, appeared to be a devoted and tireless caregiver. Through social media and a personal blog titled Garnett's Journey, she documented hospital visits, setbacks, and emotional appeals for support. She also shared a backstory designed to deepen sympathy, stating that Garnett's father had died, leaving her alone to care for a medically vulnerable child. In January 2014, that narrative began to unravel. On January 17th, Garnett was taken to Nyack Hospital in New York after his mother reported concerning symptoms. He was admitted for observation. During his stay, hospital monitoring systems recorded a striking contrast between the public story and the clinical reality. Garnett appeared active, alert, and playful, indistinguishable from other children his age. However, medical staff soon noticed a troubling pattern. After private moments between mother and child, Garnett's condition would abruptly deteriorate. These sudden changes puzzled doctors, as they did not align with any known medical explanation. Laboratory tests revealed extreme irregularities. Garnett's sodium levels rose rapidly to values that specialists recognized as incompatible with normal bodily processes. This imbalance led to severe complications and rapid decline. One physician noted plainly that the clinical picture did not match the reported history. As Garnett was transferred to a specialized children's hospital for advanced care, authorities began investigating. A search of the family's residence uncovered materials connected to Garnett's feeding equipment that showed unusually high sodium content. Medical experts later concluded that these substances had been introduced directly through his feeding system, bypassing natural protective responses. Garnett had no way to recognize what was happening. He relied entirely on trust. Further investigation dismantled the online narrative piece by piece. The story of Garnett's father being deceased was untrue. He was alive, but removed from the public storyline to heighten emotional impact. In court, prosecutors presented evidence of medical child abuse, formerly known as factitious disorder, imposed on another. They demonstrated that while online posts asked for prayers and support, private searches showed a focus on the medical consequences of sodium exposure. The jury rejected attempts to shift responsibility to medical providers. In March 2015, Lacey Spears was convicted of second-degree murder and later sentenced to 20 years to life in prison. At sentencing, the court emphasized the calculated nature of the actions and the profound breach of parental trust. Garnett Spears' story highlights the dangers of medical deception in the digital age. For years, concerns had surfaced, but frequent relocations and changes in healthcare providers allowed the pattern to continue without resolution. This case leaves behind a critical lesson. Verification saves lives. When a caregiver's account consistently conflicts with medical findings, when attention appears directed more toward public validation than a child's comfort, these are warning signs that must never be ignored. Behind every curated post is a real child. Garnett was not a story, a symbol, or a cause. He was a healthy little boy whose voice was overshadowed by a narrative he never chose. His story reminds us to look beyond appearances and to protect the child behind the blog. Case 3, the cleansing of Madelyn Tavarez. Madelyn Tavarez was 6 years old, an age defined by curiosity, trust, and an instinctive reliance on the adults meant to provide safety. A child naturally looks to their parent as their primary source of protection. But in the winter of 2025, the apartment Madelyn shared with her mother in Cypress Hills, Brooklyn, became a place of profound danger rather than care. In the early hours of Friday, February 7th, 2025, a sequence of events unfolded that would end in irreversible loss near Elton Street and Ridgewood Avenue. That morning, at approximately 4 a.m., Neighbors reported hearing loud distress coming from the apartment. The sounds were alarming enough to prompt concern from multiple residents. This was not the first indication that something was wrong. Law enforcement had reportedly visited the residence twice earlier that same week in response to related concerns. Despite these prior interactions, the situation did not reach a point of intervention at that time. Several hours later, around 1:30 p.m., emergency services were called again, this time for an unresponsive child. Officers responding to the call found Madelyn in the bathroom. She was immediately transported to Brookdale Hospital Medical Center, where medical staff attempted life-saving measures. Tragically, she was pronounced deceased shortly after arrival. Madelyn's mother, 26-year-old Karla Espinal, was taken into custody at the scene. According to investigators, she stated that she had been performing what she described as a religious act intended to cleanse her child. Authorities determined that the incident was not a symbolic or ceremonial practice, but a prolonged physical event that placed the child in extreme danger. Medical observations indicated that Madelyn had experienced intense physical distress prior to losing consciousness, contradicting any suggestion of voluntary participation or peaceful intent. The impact of Madelyn's death extended immediately to her family. Her father, who was at work at the time, learned of the incident shortly afterward. In a message sent to his employer, he expressed overwhelming shock and confusion, struggling to process the sudden loss of his daughter. Karla Espinal was arrested and charged with multiple offenses, including second-degree assault, reckless endangerment, and acting in a manner harmful to a child. She was held without bail and placed under medical observation pending a psychiatric evaluation. While the mother framed her actions in religious language, the legal system treated the incident as a criminal matter, with additional charges contingent on final medical findings. Madelyn Tavarez's death underscores the serious risks posed when belief systems cross into psychological instability. When spiritual language shifts toward ideas of cleansing, expulsion, or physical intervention involving a child, it represents a critical warning sign. Such actions are not expressions of faith. They are indicators of danger. This case also highlights missed opportunities for prevention. Neighbors reported hearing distress hours before emergency services were called. Authorities had visited the home earlier in the week. These moments matter. Faith should never manifest as fear. When a child experiences physical distress, in the name of belief, immediate intervention is required. A child cannot protect themselves from an adult's altered perception of reality. Madelyn's story reminds us that when warning signs are present, audible distress, repeated emergency visits, escalating behavior, inaction carries irreversible consequences. Listening, responding, and intervening early are not intrusions. They are acts of protection. Case 4. The girl who begged Shalom Gufaro. Shalom Gufaro was 9 years old. Friends and neighbors remembered her as cheerful and playful, a child who loved dolls and brought warmth into any space she entered. She should have felt safest inside her own bedroom, a place meant to offer comfort and security. Instead, her home in Crown Heights, Brooklyn, became a place of fear where a minor household issue spiraled into irreversible loss. On the morning of Sunday, May 15, 2022, a disagreement inside a fourth-floor apartment on Lincoln Place escalated far beyond anything a child could understand. The conflict reportedly began around 8 a.m. over a missing electronic tablet. According to court records, Shalom's mother, 48-year-old Shemene Cato, reacted with extreme and sustained anger. Both Shalom and her 13-year-old sister were subjected to harsh physical punishment over an extended period. As the situation intensified, Shalom attempted to protect herself by hiding beneath her bed. a response consistent with fear rather than defiance. Prosecutors later stated that Cato followed the child into the bedroom and attempted to pull her out from under the bed. During this effort, the heavy bed frame shifted and collapsed, striking Shalom and causing catastrophic injuries. Medical findings confirmed that the child sustained severe trauma as a result of the impact. But what troubled investigators most was not only the injury itself, it was what followed. Despite Shalom remaining conscious and calling out for assistance, no emergency help was requested. No attempt was made to move the bed or seek medical care. Instead, the child was left unattended for hours. It was not until approximately 1 p.m. that Shalom's older sister was able to leave the apartment and contact authorities. When officers arrived, they found Shalom deceased. The surviving sibling was taken to the hospital and treated for injuries, as well as the emotional shock of witnessing the loss of her sister. In the days that followed, neighbors came forward describing a pattern of frequent yelling and disturbances inside the home. While police records showed multiple prior visits to the apartment, many were categorized as domestic disputes unrelated to child welfare. As a result, no active child protective case was open at the time. Shemene Cato was initially charged with second-degree murder. In October 2023, she pleaded guilty to first-degree manslaughter and was sentenced in December 2023 to 15 years in prison. Shalom Gafaro's case highlights the danger of what can be called the auditory witness, situations where repeated sounds of distress are dismissed as routine family conflict. Neighbors later acknowledged hearing frequent yelling over an extended period, but the behavior was normalized rather than reported as a serious concern. Persistent, high-intensity verbal aggression is rarely harmless. It is often an early indicator of escalation. When a home becomes known for constant shouting, sudden silence should never be assumed to mean calm. It may signal that something has gone terribly wrong. Shalom asked for help when she needed it most. Her story reminds us that intervention must happen during the warning signs, not after the quiet that follows. Listening, reporting, and acting early can be the difference between prevention and irreversible loss. Case 5, the Flower Girl, Julie Cirella. Julie Cirella was 8 years old. To her family, she was not defined by the wheelchair she used or by her cerebral palsy, but by her warmth, her smile, and the joy she brought into every room. On the morning of July 23, 2011, Julie was preparing for what should have been one of the happiest days of her young life. She had been chosen as the flower girl for her uncle's wedding. Her dress was ready, her family was gathering. It was meant to be a day of celebration and memory-making. Instead, it became a day of loss. That Saturday morning in Plainview, New York, as wedding guests began arriving at the church, one absence became impossible to ignore. The pew reserved for Julie and her mother, 31-year-old Veronica Cirella, remained empty. Concerned, Julie's uncle drove to the family's home to check on them. He expected a delay or a simple explanation. What he found changed everything. Inside the quiet house, he discovered Julie unresponsive in a bedroom. Nearby was Veronica, also unresponsive. Emergency services were called immediately. When Veronica regained consciousness, she provided investigators with an explanation that initially evoked sympathy. She stated that Julie's condition had worsened suddenly after being given candy that may have contained traces of peanuts, to which Julie was severely allergic. Veronica claimed she attempted emergency care, but became overwhelmed when her daughter did not recover. And at first, the account appeared to describe a devastating accident followed by emotional collapse. However, forensic findings soon raised serious questions. Medical examinations revealed no evidence of peanut exposure. Toxicology reports showed no presence of the medications Veronica said she had administered. These findings directly contradicted the explanation given to authorities. The medical examiner ultimately concluded that Julie's death was not the result of an allergic reaction. As the investigation continued, authorities uncovered a handwritten note left by Veronica. In it, she described her actions as an attempt to give her daughter peace, expressing a belief that Julie would be better off beyond this life. The language of the note indicated intention rather than accident. In May 2015, nearly 4 years after Julie's death, Veronica Cirella pleaded guilty to first-degree manslaughter. She was sentenced to 12 years in prison. In the aftermath, family members expressed shock. Veronica's mother-in-law, who lived in the same home, described her as devoted and tireless, noting that she never voiced complaints or asked for help. To those around her, she appeared strong, composed, and entirely self-sufficient. Julie Cirella's case illustrates a critical psychological lesson often referred to as the silent sufferer. In caregiving culture, silence is frequently mistaken for resilience. Parents who never express strain are praised for their strength. Yet, clinically, a complete absence of expressed distress can signal isolation, emotional suppression, or untreated depression. Julie depended entirely on the adults around her for protection. Her story reminds us that caregivers under intense, prolonged pressure must not be left alone with their burden. Silence should never be assumed to mean coping. Sometimes it is the final warning before a breaking point. Intervention does not dishonor devotion, it preserves life. Julie's story teaches us that asking for help is not weakness, and that the cost of overlooking silent distress is often paid by those least able to protect themselves. Case 6, The Silent Cry, Gabriel Ortiz-Fisher. Gabriel Ortiz-Fisher was just 20 months old. He was at the early, curious stage of toddlerhood, learning to explore the world while relying completely on the adults around him for care and protection. To strangers, he appeared to be an ordinary child out with his mother for lunch in Midtown Manhattan. But beneath that ordinary moment, the stability of his life was quietly unraveling. On the afternoon of March 30th, 2015, the lunch crowd at a diner on 6th Avenue moved through its usual rhythm. At approximately 2:20 p.m., restaurant staff noticed something unusual. A woman had entered the single-occupancy restroom with her toddler, but an extended period passed without either of them coming out. Concerned employees unlocked the door using a master key. Inside, they found 35-year-old Latisha Fisher seated and holding Gabriel. The child was unresponsive and showing signs of a medical emergency. Staff immediately contacted emergency services and attempted life-saving measures while awaiting professional assistance. Throughout the response, Fisher appeared emotionally disconnected from the urgency of the situation. Gabriel was transported to Bellevue Hospital Center, where medical teams worked to stabilize him. Despite their efforts, he was pronounced deceased later that afternoon. When questioned by first responders, Fisher made statements that indicated a profound break from reality, using religious language to describe her actions. These statements prompted an immediate investigation into her mental health history. Court records revealed that Fisher had a long-standing diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia, established several years earlier following a serious incident involving a family member. At that time, she had reported experiencing intrusive thoughts and auditory disturbances. Rather than long-term incarceration, she was placed in a structured mental health treatment program designed to support rehabilitation and community reintegration. For a period, the intervention appeared successful. Fisher complied with treatment requirements, attended classes, and was described by providers as stable. She was widely viewed as an example of recovery within the system and was raising Gabriel independently. However, in the months leading up to the incident, people in her community observed changes. Fisher's behavior became increasingly unusual. including disengagement from her surroundings and the adoption of unconventional spiritual practices. Neighbors noted that she appeared distant and unresponsive at times. Despite these warning signs, no immediate protective intervention occurred. Following Gavriel's death, Fisher was charged with second-degree murder. Her legal team cited her psychiatric history as a mitigating factor. In October 2017, she entered a plea agreement, pleading guilty to first-degree manslaughter, and was sentenced to 18 years in prison. During sentencing, she expressed remorse and acknowledged her love for her son. Gavriel Ortiz-Fisher's case illustrates what can be described as the mask of stability. In mental health and social service systems, progress is often measured by visible compliance, attending appointments, taking prescribed medication, and meeting formal requirements. On paper, Fisher appeared stable, but stability is not static. This tragedy underscores a critical reality. When individuals with serious psychiatric histories begin to show subtle changes, withdrawal, altered beliefs, or emotional flatness, those shifts must be treated as urgent warning signs. Paper compliance cannot replace continuous human observation. Gavriel's safety depended on systems that tracked progress through checklists but missed the lived reality between appointments. His story reminds us that true safeguarding requires more than documentation. It requires vigilance, responsiveness, and early intervention, especially when the most vulnerable lives depend on it. Jalayah, Garnett, Madelyn, Shalom, Julie, Gavriel, 6 names, 6 futures, 6 smiles that should still be lighting up our world today. We close this series not by centering those responsible for their loss, but by honoring the children themselves, the lives that mattered, the futures that deserved protection. Because while harm can take a moment, it cannot erase meaning, memory, or truth. To the fathers, the grandparents, the uncles, the siblings, and the loved ones now living with absence, we stand with you. Your grief reflects the depth of your love, and your endurance is proof that these children were cherished, seen, and valued. We also acknowledge those who worked quietly behind the scenes. Investigators, medical examiners, social workers, and prosecutors who refused to accept convenient explanations. When doors were closed and stories did not align, you stayed. You examined overlooked details, challenged false narratives, and ensured that the truth was recorded, recognized, and remembered. You became a voice when others could not speak for themselves. The lesson is this: the most serious dangers are often the ones disguised as care. We are taught to be cautious of strangers, yet many warning signs emerge in places we assume are safe. This includes discipline taken to harmful extremes, authority framed as control, a carefully written online story that obscures reality, beliefs presented as protection, or a caregiver praised for never asking for help. When care crosses into coercion, neglect, or cruelty, it must be recognized for what it is, and it must be condemned, not excused. An unforeseen outcome is rarely sudden. It is often preceded by subtle signals, repeated concerns, shifts in behavior, escalating control, or an uneasy quiet that follows distress. Our responsibility as neighbors, as families, and as a community is to pause, to notice, and to respond. Because prevention begins with awareness, and awareness begins when we choose to see. This is Unforeseen Fates. Thank you for watching, for remembering, and for being part of a community that pays attention, because attention can make all the difference.